Due to the hard-working and continuous efforts of all Keystone Park staff, the zoo is almost ready to open its doors to the public. To be able to provide education as well as entertainment to this wonderful community is truly exciting. We truly are in the final steps of preparation. Currently, we're working on inventory management and quality control. The worst thing that could happen early on in a zoo is to have an animal escape, so we've already double-checked, and now we're triple-checking every single enclosure that we've already built. One small mistake can absolutely cripple a business, so we have to make sure we do this right, and we do this right from the start. Woohoo! That's reassuring. It looks like this enclosure was the last of them to pass the inspection. In case you missed it in the last episode, this is our brand new North American beaver habitat. It's easily our most modern and realistic exhibit to date. You can get incredibly close to the glass. Most importantly though, the two beavers that call it home like it. The guests are also sure to enjoy. You get very good views from all angles. Our staff has thankfully reported that the beavers are adjusting to their new environment ahead of schedule. Let's meet Keystone Park's newest members. This is Willow, named after the famous trees that beavers love to use in their dams. She's incredibly fast, and make sure you know it. While Willow chooses to spend most of her time on the land, Woody is basically semi-aquatic. It took him a little bit to work up the courage to use it, but he loves his deep dive pool. Remember, if you have any name suggestions for the animals in Keystone Park, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and you might get picked. Overall, this beaver enclosure is a perfect starter to the wetlands sub-area of the North American section here at Keystone Park. Today, however, we're not going to be continuing with the wetlands. We're diverting our attention back to the forest. The reason for this change in plans is because our head veterinarian is currently conducting some research on our two North American beavers. They're still new after all. The forest is currently twice the size of the wetlands, having a whopping 2 species instead of the wetlands currently 1. The largest, but surprisingly not the loudest species in the forest, are the timber wolves, and we have 2 of them here. Phoebe is the female of the pack. She's incredibly energetic and is sure to be able to entertain. Our male, Kirby, is much larger and also a whole lot quieter. He acts as a great foil. They're gonna be perfect as the first animal guests see and are introduced to at Keystone Park. Right next to the Timberwolf enclosure was an abandoned cabin on our zoo's land. Instead of destroying the past, we simply modified it. It's now home to 3 orphan red foxes. They were causing chaos in a local community, so we brought them here for their own safety. It looks like we can't introduce them right now. They must have had a long day of play. Matter of fact, Phoebe's asleep too. That doesn't happen very often, she's so hyper. And Willow's asleep? This could be a problem. We don't want to bore our guests with sleeping animals. We need to come up with a solution for this problem. All of the animals sleep at the same time here at Keystone Park, but what type of animal could possibly be on a different sleep schedule? I think I've got it. In this brand new space we recently cleared out in the heart of the forest is going to provide the perfect location to put these animals. We're going to need something nocturnal, which means this building is going to have to be dark. All of our exhibits have been relatively simple up until this point, so this is going to be a challenge. If you guys enjoyed today's video and like the content overall, don't forget to like and subscribe. The channel's going in a great direction, and I'm really happy with the progress. You'll be later, you're already here, so are you. You were 2 episodes ago. Here we go. I think the raccoon is going to be a perfect animal to add to Keystone Park. Not only are they nocturnal, it's also going to be incredibly easy to find one since they're so abundant around here. They may be abundant, but they're incredibly intelligent and cunning animals. As a result, they've amassed quite the territory, venturing into Canada and having total control over the United States and Mexico. Despite being described as solitary animals, we're gonna need to find at least 2 for them to be happy and live in their ideal conditions. It doesn't look like there's any enrichment or dietary options that we haven't encountered before. This exhibit may be one of the easiest we've actually constructed. Just kidding there, raccoons actually have cohabitation with our other animal. Cohabitation effectively means that the striped skunk and raccoon get along very well in the wild, and matter of fact they actually mutually benefit each other in some scenarios. If you recall the raccoon's population map, the striped skunk is incredibly similar. The only difference is that the skunks don't venture as far south and they go a little bit further north, but these animals interact in the wild a fair bit. Luckily for us, the striped skunk is also solitary and nocturnal. It's going to be a perfect fit to cohabitate this exhibit with the raccoon. They also have extremely similar diets, however the skunk appears to be a little bit more carnivorous. Cohabitation always works both ways, so it makes sense that the skunk can get along with the beaver and raccoon. However, it is interesting that they can get along with the black-tailed prairie dog from the North America pack. Now that we have the assignment and know exactly how to build for these animals, all we have to do is execute. Whenever I'm building an indoor enclosure, or any building in general, I always like to get my build palette first. For this build, we're going to be going with a relatively yellow wood. After you've chosen what color you want your build to be, then begin to work on the basic shape. Remember, you can always change this later, just get a rough outline. To avoid making this just a giant square, I'm going to work a curve into this side. It's going through the wall a little bit, so we have to adjust, not a problem. I want the inside of this build to be incredibly dark. These are nocturnal animals after all, so we're not going to make the whole thing out of wood. By utilizing the advanced movement menu using the move snap feature, we were very easily able to get geometrically perfect walls. For a basic outline, I'm actually quite happy with this. You can very easily see the 3 distinct chambers of the exhibit. Education Center, Backstage, actual exhibit where the animals are going to be seen. Typically I don't do details this early on into the build, but I figured this area looked really unfinished and I wanted to get the measurements correctly so we can put the door in now. The doors are very important for this build because if the doors open 24/7, it's going to let in a lot of light, and for a nocturnal house this is bad. To truly build something great, you can't get stubborn with what you've already done. For example here, we accidentally made these walls way too short for the doors, so we have to extend them up. No matter how good you are at this game, or any game in general, you're likely not going to get it exactly how you want on your first try. Never be afraid to get rid of what you've already done, or modify it in a small way to get it perfect. The dimensions are good now, the doors look perfectly natural and will be able to slide in and out once the exhibit is fully open. The next thing after the basic shape, I always like to add the roof. Now that the enclosure is fully, well, enclosed, this is the space we're left with for the raccoons and the skunk. Using the exact same technique using the Move Snap menu set at 4 meters, we're going to be placing glass along the perimeter of this enclosure. After the glass is all placed, I then dyed some plaster walls from the Africa pack brown to match the floor and covered the base of the glass. To blend it in with the roof, I took the thing that we just built, copy and pasted it, and dragged it up. I'm actually quite happy with how the final shape turned out. I like how the bottom layer of plaster is slightly smaller than the top, to give shorter guests a better view of the animals. I will say, admittedly I do like the wooden look of the floor, however the path doesn't necessarily blend too well with the exterior, so we're gonna have to change it. Now that's more like it. The black is really gonna stop the light from bouncing all over the place and make it darker. I used a different type of bench than I typically do. The conservation pack is still relatively new, and I wanted to try out its materials. While placing down the benches and trash cans, I actually had a great idea. I needed a way to make the wall dark, but not extend it very much. I had the idea to use the wallpaper, but make absolutely everything on it black. Now that we have the black masking the true depth of the field, I then added some ivy over top of it so guests are going to feel like they're in the middle of the woods. Seeing as that this exhibit is right in the middle of our forest section of Keystone Park, I decided to name it the Heart of the Forest, so we're going to have to use a lot of plants in here. This is the rough idea of how I want it to look, and obviously it's still really bright, it's daytime and we haven't messed with the lighting. We're going to add more plants later, but this is the rough effect I'm trying to capture. I want to start tweaking the lighting effect, so we're going to have to finish this exterior wall. Before we do that, we might as well add the doors to this side of the building as well. While typically I like to use the grid for the basic shape, it's almost impossible to do that when doing these small areas. While putting a second layer of plaster over the walls, I accidentally made a mistake. While using the advanced move menu, I hadn't copy and pasted every single piece. Even though technically this was a mistake, we were left with 3 perfectly evenly spaced rectangles that were primed for detailing. I decided to use these North American panels. It's very basic, not much detail out here besides the panels we just put in, but we'll come back to this later. For now I want to focus on the backstage, and raccoons are very intelligent creatures, and they're also omnivores, so they're going to need a fairly complex backstage filled with all the food they need for their diet. The first step I always like to use when completing any backstage, not just this one in particular, is to line the floor with concrete. You don't want a backstage to look as incredible as your regular exhibit. Afterwards, I took some limestone and made this hole in the wall a lot smaller so only the raccoons can use it. To hide this from the viewing eye of the guest, I took this hollowed out log that I found in the workshop to mask the hole. Highly detailed in the front, and efficient and utilitarian in the backstage. Perfect. Since this is a shared habitat between the striped skunk and the raccoon, I decided to make a space that only the raccoons could access. I got this tree from the exact same pack as the log. Working on the backstage now, I decided to add a shelf full of a bunch of tasty treats for the skunks and the raccoons to share, but we're gonna have to protect it with a fence. I will admit, both species are incredibly resourceful and crafty. They're extremely intelligent animals, but not more intelligent than a metal fence is to cure. Hopefully now you can see the vision. The raccoons and the skunk will be perfectly small enough to get through here. And once they're in the backstage, there's no way they'll be able to get to their food unless the keepers want them to. Now for the actual exhibit, the keepers aren't going to be able to come in here at all. We're going to have to get creative on how to feed these animals. For now, we just need to add this door. It's not actually functional, just for show. And of course, we have to add the other side of the door, otherwise it wouldn't be realistic. Now being an exhibit called the Heart of the Forest, this doesn't really look too lush. We're going to have to change that right now. The first thing I did was add some ivy to the west side wall. This blends it into the ceiling a little bit more effectively. Now you may be wondering why I didn't make this side of the wall black, and because we actually want the guests to be able to see the skunks and the raccoon. Raccoons and skunks have a fair amount of black and gray on their body. Matter of fact, it's almost their entire fur color, and otherwise they'd basically be invisible if this side wasn't a little bit more bright. Not wanting to have a redundant color scheme and too much ivy in this build, I then focused on the north side wall. I recolored some faux rocks, being very careful not to impede the raccoon and skunk's tunnel, to make this look like a little rock formation. To really sell the illusion, I added a different type of faux rock, changed the color ever so slightly, and scattered them about, giving the build a lot more depth. Afterwards, I came in with the terrain editing tool. I kept this one extremely basic and pretty much just exclusively used short grass. Even the beech sapling is simply too tall to not break through the roof in this exhibit, so I had to use a tree from the workshop to pair with this raccoon shelter. I then placed a base layer of buffalo grass over top of the terrain grass to make it look a little bit more complete. Normally I don't use plants and rocks in an intersecting manner because I don't typically like the overgrown look. I think it looks a little bit unprofessional for a modern zoo. However, in this exhibit called the Heart of the Forest, I want this to have an overgrown look because I want this to be untouched by man. Keeping on with this overgrown theme, I decided to use a variety of species of wild bushes to hide areas of the exhibit where I don't necessarily want the raccoons to be. Just like we did with the ivy in the ceiling, I then used these crowberry bushes to blend in the floor of the wall. I then started placing a bunch of ferns and a whole lot of buttercups all around the exhibit to truly add some color. I then lined the wood with these prickly nettle plants. This will keep the raccoons and the skunks away from scratching it, and I was very careful to make sure it wasn't breaking through the wall. Environmental storytelling is very important to me in making a habitat or an exhibit look really good. These trees that we got from the workshop don't have any leaves. Where are they? Maybe it's fall currently and they're all on the ground. Overall, I'm really happy with how much detail we were able to pack into such a small space. I think my favorite part of the exhibit so far is how one wall is rocky and the other is green. It's really good contrast. I skipped over placing the enrichment items. Between you and me, it was a nightmare to record, but we got the backstage done. So far, they have a few toys and a very simple bed. It looks like all three animals are finally in the enclosure. After a quick quality control test, it looks like we made the exhibit perfectly correct too. The scaling of the exhibit is probably my favorite part. These animals are so small in stature and size that the small size of the exhibit matches perfectly. If we made it any bigger, you wouldn't be able to find them. Our skunk, being more solitary and shy, was a little bit hard to adjust to the new environment. Our two raccoons, on the other hand, were incredibly curious, manipulating everything they could. Despite it still being daylight outside for a few more hours at least, you have to remember, these animals are nocturnal, so this is the middle of the night for them. They need some rest before they can have a full day of adjusting to their new habitat tomorrow. Keen-eyed viewers might notice that there's no food items or food enrichment for either species in this exhibit. The reason being, these items just have such big hitboxes I couldn't put them in the exhibit and make it good, but for some reason when the keeper enters from that side and he pours the food, it spawns in the big section, which works out I guess. As long as the skunk and the two raccoons can access the food, it's fine by me, so let's move on. My one gripe with this build so far is that it doesn't really look like the heart of a forest, it looks like the heart of a room with black walls. To do this, I had to get something to draw your attention away from all of the black and greens in here. And yes, a forest at dark is primarily black and green, but forests also have rock formations with different varieties and species of plants in them. This is going to act as a flower bed of sorts, and I have a really interesting plan to add some bioluminescent light effects in here. If you're unfamiliar with the term, bioluminescence is effectively when an organism, animal, or plant can produce light. Think of an anglerfish, for example. With this flower we just placed being a very pretty shade of blue, we're going to be hanging a blue light above and behind this to make it appear that it's producing light. After our rock formation and flower was done, I then went back to the walls and added a lot more vines all over the place. You can't go wrong with reward statues either. I'm a big fan of this raccoon one since it's so small. That certainly did the trick of making the forest feel a lot thicker, and the rock formation does draw the guest eyes, especially that blue flower. I like that a lot. Something still felt missing though, and I thought about it for a very long time in real time, and eventually I figured out the perfect answer. The solution was adding these branches to the ceilings and the walls. For our lighting in the inside of the exhibit, I decided to use these brand new hanging light bulbs from the conservation pack. We've used a lot of pieces from this pack in this build. It's really new and got hyped up, so I was excited to use them, and I have to say, the hype was worth it. The animals in the conservation pack aren't necessarily my favorite bunch, and for that reason I still think the aquatic pack marginally beats it out, but it's a close second. Let's get these lights on and turn them to the right color. We want 2 red and 1 blue for this flower. I'll catch back up with you guys at night to see how it looks. The infrastructure and the lighting of the heart of the forest turned out absolutely perfect, and with our mechanic now leaving the area, I think that means the exhibit passed all inspections and is going to be ready to go come opening day here very soon. It's certainly not the biggest exhibit, and it's also not the flashiest, but I'm incredibly happy with how it turned out. Here in America, the skunk and the raccoon wouldn't be considered a very interesting animal to have at a zoo, but I'm incredibly glad we gave them a very dynamic and moving exhibit. Every animal, no matter how large or small, no matter how endangered or plentiful in the world, should get equal treatment at a zoo. It doesn't matter what their conservation status is. Animals are special no matter what. Speaking of special, however, this exhibit truly becomes spectacular the second the sun sets. The lighting effects we were able to achieve, pairing that with the special effects of the falling leaves, makes this exhibit truly stand out in my eyes. The exhibit stands out in a good way, and it doesn't detract from the other works we've already built. The heart of the forest is exactly what it's supposed to be, a quaint little area where guests can come and relax and get away from the high-intensity traffic that Keystone Park inevitably is going to have. It's very serene in here. Despite it technically being daytime for these nocturnal creatures, they're still adjusting to their new habitat and are probably a little tired. I think that means we're going to have to wait until the next episode to officially meet all 3 of them. I haven't gotten a good gauge of their personalities quite yet, but if you guys manage to, feel free to leave a name suggestion in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Kingpin out. See you in the next one coming real soon.